So today's thoughts really go towards what makes an African American man who is developing his character, his gentlemanly qualities, what makes him profoundly different when he shows up. I distinctly recall going to a church convention when I was a child, and there were bishops and there were deacons and there were overseers. Overseers had this larger area of responsibility. They were almost like missionaries, but they went from church to church and they spent time with the church and then they go on to another church. But all of these men had something that separated them from what I would call the regular African American male. It was either the way they spoke, it was the way their hair was cut, it was a dark suit instead of a light suit, a wool suit instead of a seersucker suit. There were certain things about this person that just really stood out. And there was this one minister, his name was Bishop Crooms. Bishop Crooms was from Detroit, I think. I think he was from the state of Michigan. And to me, he always seemed like the most dignified person I had ever met. When he preached with a certain control but effectiveness. When he walked on the stage or on the platform where the podium was, there was a grace and an elegance with which he would do this. When he moved his hands moved in a effortless but characteristic way. And when he stood still and looked out at the audience, you just got this this feeling that someone important was standing at the pulpit delivering this sermon. And then there were ministers who stood up in front of the audience, and when they spoke, it was bombastic, or it was loud and it was forceful. It wasn't funny, but it was loud and it was forceful, but it didn't come any place close to the effect that Bishop Crooms had. So as I ponder this whole idea of style, class, and the African American male, there is something really, really profound about this gentleman who has groomed himself in such a way that the color of his skin literally enhances who and what he is. We've seen pictures of Paul Williams, the great architect who designed most of the houses during the Hollywood heyday. And one of the things they always said about Williams was how distinctive his approach was, the way he chose his words, the suits he wore, the way his mustache was trimmed. And while they tried all these different reasons for why Williams was such a stylish person, what it really came down to was how he had developed himself and his character. I think on Thurgood Marshall in his younger days. Just looking in that direction, you knew that this person had spent time and effort in becoming the gentleman or the statesman that he was. I think of Senator Brooks from Massachusetts, who died maybe a couple of years ago. Whenever I saw Edward Brooks, it was a look of just profound gentlemanliness or quality. The words that come up just go further and further and further and further into this explicit packaging of a human being, where you got a gist of who he was as a character. You got a gist of who he was as a human being and you got a gist of his spirituality. Because in most cases, when we meet people, what we recall about them is their essence. And so these names that are coming up, these people that I'm talking about, this inward thing that's being developed inside of them then begins to evolve, erupt, and explode into this persona. I've also been in the room and watched certain performers who just totally take you away. And one such person was James Earl Jones in several situations where he was giving a speech or giving a talk. The voice is distinctive anyway. And at times, the selection of clothing and the look in the face and the tilt of the head put James Earl Jones in just a place all of his own. Totally in a place all of his own. I also recall seeing the photographs and the movies where Sidney Poitier was doing Lilies of the Field or A Patch of Blue. And that character, that pure, unadulterated development into a gentleman always came out when you dealt with Sidney Poitier. And you listen to him speak, and he separates himself from people who are going in other directions. So how did he get there? I mean, how does that happen? How does a person over time dress that package, sophisticate the voice, put the mannerisms together, and create this unbelievable packaging? I've got to say that it is something that is going on inside of this person, and it has everything to do with their intent and their purpose in life. It's like you ask, what are your intentions? What are you going to do? What is your purpose? Well, I'm going to be a lawyer. So you're going to be a lawyer that people trust and want on their side because it's justice that you're concerned with? Or are you one of those lawyers who, even though you're pretty smooth, at the end of the day, you don't mind doing what you do with a measure of larceny? Or I want to be an athlete. I want to be a boxer. Or I want to be a track star. Do you become the Jesse Owens of a person, or do you become someone else who is just merely in it because he wants to make money? This happens over a period of time. And children are observing other adults and either liking what they see these people do or being a little confused about what they see them do. I know as a child I observed people approaching a minister or approaching an entertainer after a performance, and the look in their eye when they looked at the person, or the effect of the touch of the hand and the handshake when this person was dealing with this individual from the public. This is not something you can teach someone. This is something that a person observes and has a relationship with and then develops it further. So where do we get to this point where how black men carry themselves and how black men affect people separates them on this plane we call the United States of America, on this plane we call the earth? There's got to be a purpose for us to go through all the grief that we go through. And when you find out what that's all about, and you find out how you have to carry yourself so that people will give you respect without you asking for it, it takes it to another level. And on so many levels, I have noticed over the years where the dignity of certain men of color just moves into another environment. Malcolm X lived at a time when Harvard, Yale, and Princeton had him come in and speak. He was considered one of the greatest orators of his day. That had everything to do with the way he was developing himself. The men in the Nation of Islam dressed a particular way, they ate a particular way. If you were part of the Fruit of Islam, you were developed physically, emotionally, and psychologically. Malcolm was someone who was very sure of himself. And in all the pictures where you saw him in his public persona, there was a dignity, a quiet dignity about the man. When you saw pictures of Dr. King or listened to him speak, there was this clean, very deliberate humanity that exuded from this person. And he was neat, he was tidy. All of that went along with the development of this person who goes down in history, for me in many ways, as being probably one of the greatest motivators that ever lived. I mean, so why would I say he was one of the greatest motivators? You take 22 million people who have been considered descendants of slavery, who are being treated rudely and without justice in a country, and you encourage them to go up against a system with no violence, then you've done something. Motivationally, you've done something that no one else has ever done. So here's an individual who, with his presence, with the person he was, could stand in front of a group and move them in such a way that they would want to get up and go against a force that was killing many of us. So once again, this person brings this to the table. Another person that always stood out to me, and the first time I saw him I was a little kid, but I knew that this was somebody, was Adam Clayton Powell. Adam Clayton Powell was a man who could have passed for a white man. But Adam Clayton Powell made it very, very clear to anybody that he was black, and regardless of the tone of his skin, he demanded a certain level of respect. Always impeccably dressed, always impeccably groomed, and eloquent and elegant in ways that just fascinated people. He wasn't only fascinating to African Americans, he was fascinating to everyone. So fascinating that at one point the government just took it upon themselves to corner this black individual and put him in a situation where things weren't as comfortable as they could have been. So as we talk about it, and this won't be the last time that we talk about it, knowing what we're up against in this country, knowing how people show so much disrespect for the color of the skin, it is a remarkable, remarkable thing that some of our men can dress their attitude, dress their spirit, and dress their bodies in such a way that they demand respect without even asking for it, because they've invested so much in becoming the person that they want to be and the person that they are. You won't get the respect and the acknowledgement of dignity unless you can exude it. And year after year, generation after generation, the Nelson Mandelas have shown up, Jomo Kenyattas, the Patrice Lubumbas. These men, in times when colonialism and racism were cornering them and putting them in a place of little humanity, always rose above the whole situation. And so when I think about what it is I would like to be or I would like to do, it has everything with fully developing my character in such a way that I dress my person properly, that I speak properly, and that I exude a certain kind of humanity that the young people who are watching would want to be a part of. So for today's conversation, we look at the incredible contributions of black men who were oppressed but came off like princes and kings in an environment where they were being treated like paupers. And with that, I rest my case.